The metal detector beeped for the third time, and Marcus Davis Jr., 8 years old, 4 feet tall, wearing a Target hoodie that cost $12 but hid $2,000 worth of Italian cashmere underneath, stepped back through the scanner with the patience of someone who'd learned early that the world moved slower for people who looked like him. T.S.A. Officer Mills waved him forward again, eyes scanning the boy's worn sneakers and backpack like they might contain contraband instead of quarterly reports for a $4.8 billion empire. The officer's hand hovered near the radio clipped to his belt, fingers twitching with the particular nervousness of someone deciding whether an 8-year-old black kid warranted extra scrutiny. Junior kept his face neutral. His father had taught him that before the helicopter went down 3 years ago, spiraling into the Hudson with both parents aboard and leaving their only son, the youngest CEO in American history. Stay calm. Document everything. Give them 3 chances to do the right thing. This was chance number 1. The scanner beeped again, a 4th time now, and Mills finally pulled Junior aside to the screening area where a supervisor materialized with the practiced speed of someone who'd been watching the whole interaction unfold. The nameplate read Kowalski, and his eyes carried the weight of 30 years deciding who looked dangerous and who didn't. Junior's Apple Watch recorded everything. The angle captured Kowalski's face perfectly as the supervisor gestured toward the secondary screening station, where business travelers in suits passed through with nothing more than a wave and a smile. Behind him in line, an elderly white couple shuffled through without breaking stride. Their carry-on bags went unexamined. Their shoes stayed on their feet. The wife glanced back at Junior with something that might have been sympathy or might have been relief that the attention had focused elsewhere. Mills began emptying Junior's backpack with theatrical thoroughness, pulling out an iPad, a leather portfolio, and a manila folder thick with complaint data that Junior had been reviewing during the town car ride from Manhattan. The officer held up the iPad like it was evidence of something. The question came with thinly veiled skepticism. What was a kid doing with a $4,000 computer? Junior's response was measured, each word carefully chosen. He worked in technology. Venture capital, actually. Kowalski's laugh cut through the sterile air of Terminal 4, sharp enough that other passengers turned to look. The supervisor's voice carried across 3 security lanes when he suggested that Junior might be confused about what venture capital meant, adding that maybe the boy should stick to whatever his parents did for a living. The iPad screen lit up with an incoming email notification. Junior caught a glimpse of the sender. James Patterson, CEO of Sky Nation Airlines, forwarding the latest discrimination complaint data that Junior had requested 48 hours earlier. 52 incidents in 18 months, 47 involving black passengers, a pattern so clear that even the algorithm had flagged it red. Mills was still examining the laptop bag when Grace Williams appeared at the edge of the security checkpoint, her silver hair pulled back in the same style she'd worn during her 20 years as COO of Davis Enterprises. She didn't approach. Junior had made it clear he needed to handle this himself, but her presence shifted something in the air. The way she stood suggested authority that had nothing to do with volume or aggression. Kowalski noticed her watching. His fingers drummed against Junior's iPad one final time before handing it back with a grunt that might have been dismissal or might have been disappointment that nothing contraband had materialized to justify the stop. Junior repacked his belongings with deliberate care, checking that every document went back in the correct folder, every cable wound properly. His father's voice echoed in his memory. When they make you prove yourself, prove it so thoroughly they can't argue. Then prove it again. The whole interaction had consumed 14 minutes. Junior knew because his watch tracked everything, storing the footage in encrypted cloud storage that his legal team could access within seconds if needed. The timestamp would matter later, when attorneys reconstructed the morning's events and tried to establish patterns of bias that went beyond one child at one checkpoint. Grace fell into step beside him as he cleared security, her low heels clicking against the polished floor of JFK's Terminal 4. She carried 2 leather portfolios and a tablet that displayed real-time security camera feeds from every corner of Sky Nation's operation. The airline his parents had acquired 6 years ago as part of a diversification strategy, back when Junior was still learning to read, and his biggest responsibility was choosing which private school to attend. Now he owned 67% of it through the Davis Family Trust, with final authority over every major decision and a clause in his parents' will that gave him something most 8-year-olds didn't have: the legal power to fire anyone whose actions violated the company's ethical standards. His father had put that clause in the trust documents specifically because he believed corporate boards thought too much about quarterly profits and not enough about the families their decisions destroyed. Junior was supposed to be the moral compass, the one person in the empire who couldn't rationalize discrimination as acceptable cost of doing business. The weight of that responsibility settled across Junior's shoulders every morning when he reviewed complaint data over breakfast, reading stories about passengers who'd been humiliated, delayed, or removed from flights for reasons that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with assumptions about who belonged in first class. Grace's voice was quiet, meant only for Junior's ears. She asked if he was ready for this, really ready, because once they started documenting what happened at Gate 41, there would be no walking it back. The airline would know they were being watched, employees would lawyer up, the media would descend like locusts. Junior's answer was simple: the data didn't lie, and if they were serious about fixing the problem, they needed to see it firsthand. No filters, no PR spin, just the raw reality of how Sky Nation's employees treated passengers who didn't look like they could afford first-class tickets. They found seats in the Admiral's Lounge with a clear line of sight to the departure boards. Grace's tablet showed feeds from 16 cameras across gates 38 through 42, the cluster of departure areas that had generated the highest concentration of complaints. Junior pulled up the passenger manifest for Flight 892 to Chicago, cross-referencing names against loyalty program data and payment records. Seat 3A belonged to Dr. Sarah Mitchell. First-class ticket purchased 3 weeks earlier at full price, $4,200, non-refundable. The credit card on file matched her name. No flags in the system, no history of problems, no reason for any gate agent or flight attendant to question her legitimacy. Junior opened a second window showing Dr. Mitchell's background. The information wasn't hard to find for someone with access to the right databases. 42 years old, graduated from Columbia Medical School in the top 5% of her class, residency at Johns Hopkins, where she'd been the only black woman in a program of 51 doctors. Now she worked at Columbia University Medical Center as a pediatric cardiac surgeon, and according to her public calendar, she was presenting research at the American Heart Association's annual conference in Chicago tomorrow morning. Research that could reduce mortality rates in children with congenital heart defects by 43%. Grace leaned over to see what Junior was reading, her expression shifting from professional interest to something harder when she saw Dr. Mitchell's photo. She recognized the look in the surgeon's eyes, the particular combination of pride and wariness that came from spending a lifetime being the first, the only, the one who had to prove herself twice as hard for half the recognition. Grace knew that look because she'd worn it herself for 20 years, climbing from administrative assistant to chief operating officer at a time when executive suites were even whiter and more male than they were now. She'd survived by being better prepared than everyone else in the room, by never giving them an excuse to doubt her competence, by smiling through microaggressions that should have gotten people fired, but instead got filed away as cultural misunderstandings. Junior asked what Grace saw when she looked at Dr. Mitchell's photo. The answer came after a long pause. She saw Junior's mother. Not physically. Jennifer Davis had been taller, with different features and a different background. But in the quiet determination that radiated from the surgeon's professional headshot, the same refusal to let other people's limitations define what was possible. The departure board updated. Flight 892 was on time, boarding in 90 minutes from Gate 41. Junior checked the gate agent assignments and felt his stomach tighten when he saw the names. Jennifer Hayes. 12 complaints in 14 months, all involving passengers of color. 0 disciplinary actions. Diane Porter at the check-in counter. 16 years with Sky Nation. 11 complaints. Pattern of demanding extra documentation from Black and Hispanic passengers. Tom Bradley as shift supervisor. Enabler-in-chief. The person who'd signed off on every complaint dismissal, who'd written performance reviews praising his team's thoroughness, while passengers filed civil rights grievances that mysteriously disappeared into administrative limbo. And scheduled as the captain for Flight 892, Michael Harrison, 62 years old, 37 years flying commercial aircraft. 0 tolerance for what he called passenger disruptions, which seemed to include Black passengers who objected to being treated like criminals for sitting in seats they'd paid for. Junior pulled up Harrison's personnel file, reading through commendations that praised his safety record and passenger complaints that told a different story. One from 18 months ago stood out. A Black businessman had been removed from first class after Harrison decided the man's agitation about being questioned by flight attendants constituted a security threat. The businessman's agitation had consisted of asking to speak to a supervisor. Video footage showed him speaking in normal conversational tones, hands visible, making no threatening gestures. Sky Nation had settled that complaint for an undisclosed sum with a non-disclosure agreement attached. The businessman had taken the money and signed away his right to talk about what happened. Harrison had received a letter in his file noting that while the removal was technically within his authority as captain, he should consider whether alternative de-escalation approaches might be more appropriate in future. Consider. Might be. More appropriate. The language of corporate ass covering, designed to protect the company while changing nothing about how captains exercised their authority. Grace's tablet chimed with an alert. Security footage showed a Black woman approaching the Sky Nation check-in counter, professional blazer over a white blouse, sensible heels that suggested someone who spent long hours on her feet. She carried herself with the particular grace of someone accustomed to being watched, evaluated, judged on appearance before anyone bothered to learn her credentials. Junior zoomed in on the timestamp. 7:43 a.m. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had arrived at the airport 2 hours before departure, which was more time than most domestic travelers allowed, but exactly the buffer that people who'd experienced discrimination learned to build into their schedules. Better to sit at the gate for 90 minutes than risk missing a flight because some agent decided your ticket needed extra verification. Diane Porter looked up from her computer as Dr. Mitchell approached, and Junior saw the micro-expression that flashed across the agent's face before professional neutrality locked into place. It was the look of someone making instant calculations about who deserved attention and who deserved scrutiny. Decisions happening faster than conscious thought and justified later as intuition or experience. The surgeon placed her phone on the counter, boarding pass visible on the screen. Seat 3A, first class, confirmation code displayed clearly. Everything a passenger needed to check in for a flight. Porter's hand didn't move toward the keyboard. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, voice carrying the particular tone that service workers used when they wanted to establish hierarchy while maintaining plausible deniability about their intent. She informed Dr. Mitchell that this line was reserved for first-class passengers. The surgeon's response was patient, each word carefully enunciated. She was first class. Seat 3A, as shown on her boarding pass. Porter leaned forward to examine the phone screen like she was inspecting evidence at a crime scene, eyes narrowing as she studied the confirmation code. Her fingers finally moved toward the keyboard, pecking out the code with the hunt and peck method of someone who'd never bothered to learn proper typing. The computer screen reflected in her reading glasses, showing the exact same information that Dr. Mitchell's phone displayed. The agent's next words would have been unremarkable to anyone who hadn't spent 3 years analyzing discrimination patterns in customer service interactions. She needed to verify the ticket. The confirmation number looked irregular. Junior leaned closer to Grace's tablet, watching Dr. Mitchell's face for signs of the frustration that had to be building beneath that composed exterior. The surgeon's hands remained visible on the counter. No sudden movements. Nothing that could be construed as aggressive. Her voice stayed level when she pointed out that she'd purchased the ticket directly from Sky Nation's website 3 weeks ago, using her credit card. Porter wasn't listening. Her attention had shifted to the queue forming behind Dr. Mitchell, where 3 white passengers waited with varying degrees of patience. The agent's eyes flicked between her computer and the waiting travelers, calculating which problem was easier to solve. Verify 1 irregular-looking ticket, or process 3 presumably legitimate ones. The request came wrapped in corporate politeness, but left no room for negotiation. Dr. Mitchell needed to provide her passport, credit card, and purchase receipt. Junior watched the surgeon's hand move to her purse, pulling out a passport that had been renewed 2 months ago for this exact trip. The credit card emerged next, black titanium that reflected the fluorescent terminal lighting. And finally, she produced a printed confirmation email, because people who'd been questioned before learned to carry paper backup for everything. Porter barely glanced at the documents before calling for her supervisor with a hand gesture that suggested this was routine, unremarkable, just part of the thorough verification process that kept airlines safe and passengers protected. Tom Bradley materialized with practiced efficiency, his name tag identifying him as the shift supervisor, and his expression suggesting he'd already decided who was right before hearing any details. He picked up the passport first, holding it at arm's length like he needed reading glasses but was too vain to wear them in public. His question to Dr. Mitchell presumed guilt disguised as helpful concern. Where had she really purchased this ticket? The surgeon's answer didn't change. Sky Nation's official website 3 weeks ago, using the credit card currently on the counter. Bradley's response introduced a new element to justify the suspicion. The airline had been seeing a lot of fraudulent tickets lately, he explained, purchased through third-party vendors that sometimes engaged in questionable practices. People like her. He caught himself, verbal stumble barely perceptible. Budget-conscious travelers sometimes got confused about which websites were legitimate. Dr. Mitchell's correction was sharp enough to cut. She wasn't budget-conscious. She was a paying customer, with $4,200 worth of legitimate first-class ticket. And what exactly did he mean by people like her? Bradley's backpedal was textbook corporate deflection. He hadn't meant anything by it, just trying to protect passengers from fraud. The extra verification was for her own good, really, to make sure no one had stolen her identity or misused her credit card. Junior's jaw clenched as he watched Bradley examine documents that proved exactly what Dr. Mitchell had been saying from the beginning. The supervisor spent 90 seconds creating the appearance of thoroughness before finally nodding and handing everything back with a kind of smile that suggested he'd done her a favor by allowing her to check in for a flight she'd purchased 3 weeks earlier. Grace's voice was quiet. That was strike one. Junior didn't disagree, but his father had taught him that documentation mattered, that patterns proved discrimination more effectively than single incidents. One interaction could be explained away as miscommunication or individual error. Multiple interactions across multiple employees with the same target created evidence that lawyers couldn't dismiss and juries wouldn't ignore. Dr. Mitchell collected her documents and moved toward security with the controlled grace of someone who just spent 15 minutes proving she had the right to exist in a space she'd paid to occupy. Her shoulders carried tension that hadn't been there when she had approached the counter, a physical manifestation of the exhaustion that came from being questioned about things other passengers took for granted. Junior checked the time. 8:02 a.m. The surgeon had lost 19 minutes to an interaction that should have taken 90 seconds. She was still well ahead of boarding time, but the buffer she'd built into her schedule had started eroding before she'd even cleared check-in. The security checkpoint processed Dr. Mitchell without incident, though Junior noticed that her bags went through additional screening while white travelers behind her moved through express lanes with barely a pause. The TSA agent's explanation, random selection, didn't match the data Junior had on randomization patterns. But airports were federal jurisdiction, and documenting discrimination there meant filing complaints with different agencies through different processes. One problem at a time. Grace's tablet showed Dr. Mitchell emerging from security and checking the departure boards, confirming that Gate 41 was her destination. The surgeon had 90 minutes until boarding, enough time to find coffee and review whatever presentation materials she'd brought for tomorrow's conference. Junior watched her disappear into the flow of terminal traffic, then shifted his attention back to Gate 41, where Jennifer Hayes was starting her shift. The gate agent logged into her terminal with the bored efficiency of someone who'd performed the same actions thousands of times. Muscle memory guiding fingers across a keyboard that had probably been outdated when she'd started working for Sky Nation 12 years ago. The passenger manifest for Flight 892 scrolled across Hayes' screen. Junior couldn't see the details from his position in the lounge, but he knew what information was displayed. Names, seat assignments, loyalty program status, special service requests. Everything a gate agent needed to know about who was boarding and where they belonged. Hayes paused on something, her expression shifting in ways that Junior had learned to recognize from hundreds of hours studying video footage of discrimination incidents. It was the micro-calculation that happened when service workers saw information that didn't match their expectations, when cognitive dissonance triggered the need to investigate further or protect the company from potential fraud. Junior would have bet his entire trust fund that Hayes had just noticed a name that didn't sound like it belonged in seat 3A, and was now preparing to do something about it. Grace leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment before speaking. She asked Junior one more time if he was certain about this approach, because there were other ways to investigate discrimination complaints that didn't involve an 8-year-old CEO putting himself in the same terminal where his employees were about to humiliate a distinguished surgeon. But Junior had learned from watching his parents build an empire that sometimes the only way to understand what was really happening was to see it with your own eyes, to strip away the layers of bureaucracy and corporate spin and PR damage control that turned human suffering into acceptable business risk. The data told him that Sky Nation had a problem. Now he needed to see exactly how deep that problem ran, and whether the people running his airline cared more about protecting passengers or protecting themselves. Dr. Mitchell reappeared on the security feed at 8:37, walking toward Gate 41 with a coffee in one hand and her phone in the other. She'd found a seat near the windows with a view of the tarmac, and Junior watched her settle in to review what looked like presentation slides, occasionally making notes with a stylus on her tablet screen. 23 other passengers occupied the gate area. Junior categorized them automatically. Business travelers in suits checking emails, families wrangling children and carry-on bags, a few leisure passengers reading books or staring at their phones. The racial demographics skewed heavily white, which wasn't unusual for first-class cabins on domestic routes, but wasn't inevitable either. The gate monitor updated with boarding information. Flight 892 would begin boarding at 9:45, first class and premium passengers first. Hayes made an announcement over the PA system, her voice carrying the practiced cheerfulness that airline employees learned during training and gradually lost over years of delayed flights and angry customers. Junior checked his own boarding pass, the one Grace had arranged under a pseudonym that wouldn't trigger alerts in Sky Nation's system. Seat 12C in economy, far enough back that he wouldn't be noticed during the boarding process, but close enough to observe everything that happened in the forward cabin. Grace had objected to that part of the plan. Putting Junior on the aircraft meant exposing him to whatever happened when gate agents and flight attendants decided that Dr. Mitchell's ticket needed verification, that her seat belonged to someone more deserving, that she represented some kind of irregularity requiring immediate resolution. But Junior had overruled her. He couldn't document what he couldn't witness, and trusting security camera footage meant trusting that cameras would be positioned correctly, that audio would be clear, that battery backups would work if someone decided to disable the recording systems. His Apple Watch would record everything from his wrist, encrypted and uploaded in real time to servers that Sky Nation's IT department couldn't access without a federal warrant. And if things escalated the way Junior suspected they would, that footage would become evidence in civil rights lawsuits that would reshape how American Airlines thought about discrimination. The minutes crawled past. Dr. Mitchell reviewed her presentation. Hayes processed paperwork at the gate counter. Other passengers began congregating near the boarding area, forming the shapeless queue that Americans created, despite assigned boarding groups and clearly marked lane dividers. At 9:32, a white couple in their late 50s approached Hayes with the confident stride of people accustomed to preferential treatment. The man's suit probably cost more than most passengers spent on their entire trip, and the woman's jewelry caught the terminal lighting in ways that suggested real diamonds rather than costume pieces. Junior didn't need to hear the conversation to know what was happening. Hayes's body language shifted instantly, shoulders back, smile widening, fingers flying across the keyboard with sudden efficiency. She produced upgraded boarding passes within 90 seconds, chatting pleasantly about how wonderful it was that loyal customers like the Whitmores continued choosing Sky Nation for their travel needs. Richard and Victoria Whitmore. Junior pulled up their loyalty profiles on his tablet. Diamond Elite status, which meant they'd flown at least 100,000 miles in the past calendar year. Preferred seating requests on file. Richard liked window seats in row 1 or 2, close to the front for quick deplaning. Victoria preferred aisle seats with extra leg room. The Whitmore's current boarding passes showed seats 1A and 1B, first class, which was perfectly fine and exactly what their status entitled them to. But Richard was looking at the seating chart on Hayes's monitor, and his finger was pointing at something in row 3. Junior's stomach tightened. He zoomed in on the security camera feed, adjusting the angle until he could see what Richard was indicating. Seat 3A. Dr. Mitchell's seat. The window position that Richard apparently preferred and thought should be available to him despite being assigned to another passenger who'd purchased it 3 weeks earlier at full price. Hayes was nodding, her expression shifting from pleasant customer service to conspiratorial problem-solving. A Diamond Elite customer who flew regularly and generated significant revenue for the airline wanted a seat currently assigned to a passenger with no loyalty status, no history with Sky Nation, no leverage to push back if her assignment got changed. The gate agent's decision was probably already made before Richard finished explaining why he preferred window seats. Something about needing natural light for working during flights and having important business to conduct before landing in Chicago. Hayes's response was careful, diplomatic, designed to sound helpful rather than discriminatory. She couldn't guarantee anything, but she'd see what she could do about accommodating Mr. Whitmore's preferences. Sometime Mitchell with her carefully rehearsed request to give up a seat that another passenger deserved more. His father's voice echoed again. Document everything. Give them 3 chances. Let them reveal themselves fully before you act. This was chance number 2, and if Junior's assessment of the pattern was correct, Dr. Mitchell Jr. positioned himself near a support column with a clear line of sight to both the gate counter and the seating area where Dr. Mitchell had remained focused on her presentation materials, unaware that 2 gate agents and a Diamond Elite passenger were currently discussing whether she deserved to keep the seat she'd purchased. Grace appeared at his elbow, voice low enough that nearby passengers couldn't overhear. They'd given him power specifically so he could use it when corporate executives and board members chose profit over principles. And if that meant exposing himself to scrutiny at age 8, if it meant dealing with media attention and legal battles and all the complications that came from being the youngest CEO in American history who refused to ignore discrimination happening under his own airline's logo, then that was the price of doing the right thing. Grace didn't argue. She'd spent 20 years working for Junior's parents, long enough to recognize the particular Davis family stubbornness that made negotiation pointless once a decision had been made. The PA system crackled to life. Hayes's voice announced that boarding would begin in 5 minutes for first-class passengers and those requiring additional time or assistance. Junior lifted his wrist, activated his Apple Watch recording function with a triple press that looked like he was checking the time, and waited to see exactly how badly Sky Nation's employees would fail the test they didn't know they were taking. Hayes lifted the microphone with the practiced motion of someone who'd made thousands of boarding announcements, her voice taking on the artificial brightness that gate agents used when they needed passengers to comply without questioning why. First-class passengers and those requiring additional assistance could now board Flight 892 to Chicago. Dr. Sarah Mitchell gathered her materials with efficient movements, sliding the tablet into her leather bag and finishing the last of her coffee before standing. She moved toward the boarding area with the confidence of someone who'd earned every dollar that paid for her seat, who'd saved for 9 months to afford this one gesture of self-recognition after 2 decades of proving herself in rooms that didn't want her there. Junior watched her approach the gate counter, boarding pass ready on her phone screen, and felt his chest tighten with anticipation of what was about to unfold. Hayes looked up from her monitor as Dr. Mitchell reached the podium, and Junior saw the micro-expression flash across the agent's face again, that split-second calculation that happened faster than conscious thought, the instant categorization of who belonged and who needed verification. The gate agent's hand moved toward the boarding pass scanner, then stopped. Her eyes shifted from the phone screen to Dr. Mitchell's face and back again, like she was comparing a photograph to a suspect and finding discrepancies that required investigation. The words came wrapped in professional courtesy that couldn't quite hide the underlying skepticism. "Ma'am, there seemed to be an issue with the boarding pass." Dr. Mitchell's response was patient, each syllable carefully controlled. "What kind of issue?" "She checked in at the counter 90 minutes ago. Everything had been verified then." Hayes tilted the phone screen toward her computer monitor like she needed better light to read the confirmation code, even though the gate area's fluorescent lighting was more than adequate. Her fingers tapped at her keyboard with theatrical slowness, pulling up reservation details that she'd already accessed 15 minutes earlier when Richard Whitmore had inquired about seat availability. The agent's next words introduced new language designed to justify what was coming. The system was showing an irregularity with seat 3A. Dr. Mitchell's patience acquired an edge sharp enough to cut through the corporate double talk. What specific irregularity? The seat was assigned to her, paid for, confirmed. But Hayes wasn't scanning the boarding pass or waving Dr. Mitchell through. Instead, she gestured toward the side of the podium with a hand motion that suggested this conversation needed to happen away from other passengers, somewhere the growing line wouldn't overhear the questioning that apparently needed to occur. Junior shifted position slightly, ensuring his watch had an unobstructed view of both women. The microphone picked up every word, even though Hayes had lowered her voice to a register meant for private discussions about matters that reflected poorly on whoever was being questioned. The gate agent's explanation unfolded with practiced smoothness. Sometimes tickets purchased through certain channels didn't process correctly in the system. She needed to verify that Dr. Mitchell's purchase had been legitimate, that the payment had cleared, that this wasn't one of those unfortunate situations where passengers showed up with reservations that didn't actually exist in the airline's database. Dr. Mitchell pulled out her phone again, navigating to her email with the controlled movements of someone working very hard not to show the frustration building beneath her professional exterior. The confirmation email appeared on screen, displaying the Sky Nation logo, the reservation code, the seat assignment, the payment total, and the purchase date from 3 weeks earlier. Hayes barely glanced at the email before introducing a new concern. These confirmation emails could be forged, she explained with apologetic efficiency. Scammers had gotten quite sophisticated lately. The agent needed to see the credit card used for purchase, and perhaps some additional identification to ensure everything was properly documented. The surgeon's hand moved to her wallet with mechanical precision, extracting her black titanium card and driver's license. She placed both on the counter between them, with just enough force to make a sound without being aggressive, a physical manifestation of displeasure that stayed within the bounds of acceptable passenger behavior. Hayes examined the credit card like she was an expert in detecting counterfeits, holding it up to the light and running her thumb across the embossed numbers. The driver's license received similar scrutiny, with the agent comparing the photo to Dr. Mitchell's face multiple times, as if checking whether someone had stolen the identity of a 42-year-old cardiac surgeon and was attempting to use it to board a domestic flight to Chicago. Junior's jaw clenched as he watched the performance unfold. Every movement Hayes made was designed to look like legitimate security verification, while actually serving to delay, frustrate, and humiliate a passenger whose only crime was existing in a space where the gate agent had decided she didn't belong. Other first-class passengers moved through the boarding process with barely a pause. An elderly white couple in seats 1A and 1B, the Whitmores, Junior confirmed with a glance at his tablet, had their passes scanned in under 5 seconds. A business traveler in his 30s breezed through with nothing more than a smile and a nod. A family with 2 young children got waved aboard with friendly efficiency. Dr. Mitchell remained at the podium, documents spread across the counter, while Hayes continued her theatrical verification of information that had already been verified 90 minutes earlier at check-in. The gate agent finally looked up from the credit card, her expression suggesting she'd discovered something troubling that required supervisory involvement. She asked Dr. Mitchell to wait 1 moment while she consulted with her manager about the proper procedure for handling this type of irregularity. Tom Bradley materialized from the back office with the purposeful stride of someone who'd been watching the whole interaction on the gate counter monitor and had decided his presence was required. His name tag caught the fluorescent miting as he approached, and Junior saw Dr. Mitchell's shoulders tense slightly, the physical response of someone who recognized that escalation was happening and nothing good came from situations that required management intervention. Bradley's opening words established his authority while simultaneously suggesting that Dr. Mitchell was creating problems rather than trying to board a flight she'd legitimately purchased. Was there a difficulty here? The surgeon's response was measured but firm. There shouldn't be. She had a confirmed ticket, verified identification, and the credit card used for purchase. Everything the airline could possibly need to confirm her legitimacy. But Bradley wasn't satisfied with those assurances. He picked up Dr. Mitchell's credit card, examining it with the same theatrical thoroughness Hayes had employed, then turned his attention to the driver's license. His fingers moved across the counter to collect the phone showing the confirmation email, and he studied each piece of documentation like he was assembling evidence for a case, rather than verifying a passenger's right to board. Junior's watch captured every second of the interaction, storing footage that would eventually become Exhibit A in depositions and civil rights lawsuits. The timestamp showed that Dr. Mitchell had now been at the gate counter for 7 minutes and 40 seconds, undergoing scrutiny that no white passenger had faced during the same boarding period. Bradley finally set down the documents and turned his attention fully to the surgeon, his voice dropping into the register that authority figures used when they wanted to sound helpful while actually being condescending. He explained that Sky Nation took security very seriously, especially given recent incidents of ticket fraud. The extra verification was really for her own protection, to ensure no one had compromised her credit card or stolen her identity. The explanation might have been plausible if Dr. Mitchell hadn't just watched 8 other first-class passengers board without any security verification beyond scanning their passes. The selective application of these supposedly rigorous security measures made Bradley's justification transparent as window glass. Dr. Mitchell's response cut through the corporate double-talk with surgical precision. She'd been through security. The TSA had verified her identity. Her ticket had been confirmed at check-in. What additional verification could possibly be necessary for a domestic flight that hadn't already been completed by federal security personnel and the airline's own staff? Bradley's answer revealed the real issue lurking beneath all the professional language about security and verification. Sometimes passengers booked seats that were beyond their usual travel patterns, he explained, and the airline had protocols for ensuring those passengers understood what they'd purchased and were prepared for the first-class experience. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Dr. Mitchell didn't look like someone who normally flew first class, and Bradley wanted to make sure she knew what she was getting into before boarding an aircraft where she might be uncomfortable among the business professionals and wealthy travelers who typically occupied premium cabins. Junior felt his hands ball into fists at his sides. Grace touched his elbow gently, a reminder to maintain composure, to let the documentation continue, to give these employees every opportunity to reveal themselves fully before intervening. Dr. Mitchell's voice remained steady, but steel had entered her tone. She was a physician. She'd flown first class before. She knew exactly what she'd purchased and was perfectly comfortable in premium cabins. Now, could she please board the aircraft before the gate closed? Bradley's response introduced a new element designed to pressure the surgeon into accepting alternatives. There had been a last-minute request from one of Sky Nation's Diamond Elite members. He gestured vaguely toward where the Whitmores had already boarded, about seat preferences. The airline valued its loyal customers and sometimes made accommodations to ensure their satisfaction. If Dr. Mitchell would be willing to accept a complimentary upgrade to premium economy, plus a voucher for a future flight, everyone could move forward without further delay. The mathematics of that offer was insulting. Dr. Mitchell had paid $4,200 for seat 3A. Premium economy tickets on this route cost around $1,800. The voucher would likely be restricted, expiring within a year and subject to blackout dates that made it nearly impossible to use. She was being asked to accept roughly half the value of what she'd purchased so that a Diamond Elite passenger could have the window seat he preferred. The surgeon's answer came without hesitation. No, she would not accept a downgrade. She had paid full price for first class and intended to sit in the seat she'd reserved 3 weeks ago. Bradley's expression shifted from helpful manager to someone whose patience was wearing thin. He reminded Dr. Mitchell that the airline had discretionary authority over seat assignments, that customer satisfaction sometimes required flexibility, and that being unreasonable about these matters could result in delays that affected everyone on the flight. The veiled threat was clear: comply or face consequences. Dr. Mitchell didn't move from the podium. Her hands remained visible on the counter. Her voice remained controlled, but she repeated her position with the finality of someone who'd drawn a line and wouldn't be moved past it. She was sitting in seat 3A, the seat she'd purchased, the seat that was legally hers, according to the contract she'd entered into when Sky Nation accepted her $4,200 payment. Junior watched Bradley's face cycle through frustration, calculation, and decision. The supervisor turned slightly, making eye contact with someone Junior couldn't see from his current position, then nodded once, a gesture that looked like confirmation or approval of a plan already set in motion. Hayes picked up the phone at the gate counter, her finger moving across the keypad with deliberate slowness. She spoke quietly into the receiver, but Junior's watch microphone picked up enough to understand what was happening. She was calling airport security and requesting assistance with an uncooperative passenger at Gate 41. Dr. Mitchell heard it too. Her posture straightened, shoulders pulling back with the instinctive response of someone preparing for confrontation while trying to maintain dignity. She asked Bradley directly whether he was seriously calling security because she refused to give up a seat she'd paid for. The supervisor's response hid behind corporate policy and federal regulations. Passengers who refused to follow crew instructions could be denied boarding. The captain had final authority over who flew on the aircraft. If Dr. Mitchell continued to be difficult about this, she was creating a situation that might result in her being unable to travel at all. The threat had escalated from accept a downgrade to you might not fly at all in the span of 2 sentences. Other passengers in the boarding queue were starting to notice the confrontation. Phones came out, not yet recording, but ready. A young mother with 2 children looked uncomfortable, like she wanted to say something, but couldn't quite bring herself to insert herself into a conflict between airline employees and another passenger. An elderly man in an expensive suit watched with the detached interest of someone observing drama that didn't concern him. Junior moved closer, weaving through the crowd with the ease of a small child who could navigate spaces adults couldn't access. Grace followed at a distance, her presence a steady reminder that Junior wasn't alone, even though he'd insisted on handling this confrontation himself. Security appeared within 3 minutes, which suggested they'd been staged nearby, or at least warned that they might be needed at Gate 41. 3 officers in the dark blue uniforms of airport security, their badges catching the terminal lighting as they approached the gate counter with professional efficiency. The lead officer was older, probably mid-50s, with silver hair and the particular confidence that came from decades of handling airport incidents. His nameplate read Walsh, and his eyes swept across the scene with practiced assessment. Gate agents looking frustrated. Passengers standing at counter with documents spread out. Growing crowd of onlookers beginning to film with their phones. Walsh's voice carried authority, developed through years of making passengers comply with instructions they didn't want to follow. Was there a problem here? Bradley jumped in before Dr. Mitchell could respond, establishing the narrative that would justify whatever came next. They had a passenger refusing to accept alternative seating, creating a delay that was affecting the entire flight's departure schedule, and demonstrating a pattern of uncooperative behavior that raised concerns about her fitness to fly. Junior's chest tightened with rage at the distortion. Doctor. Mitchell hadn't refused alternative seating. She'd refused to accept a downgrade and the theft of a seat she'd purchased. She wasn't creating delays. The airline's employees were creating delays by questioning her legitimacy. And her behavior had been nothing but cooperative and professional while being subjected to scrutiny that no white passenger had faced. But Walsh didn't ask for Dr. Mitchell's side of the story. He turned to her with the weary expression of someone who'd handled too many difficult passengers and had learned that the fastest resolution usually involved convincing them to comply with whatever the airline wanted. His words came wrapped in professional courtesy. Ma'am, if the airline was offering alternative seating arrangements, perhaps it would be best to accept their offer and avoid further complications. Doctor? Mitchell's response was quiet, but absolutely firm. She wasn't accepting a downgrade from a seat she'd paid for. She had done nothing wrong. She had valid documentation. She had the legal right to sit in seat 3A. Walsh's expression shifted slightly, like he'd hoped this would be easy, but recognized it was going to require more effort. He explained that the airline had broad discretion over seating assignments, that passengers who created disturbances could be denied boarding, and that refusing to follow crew instructions was actually a federal offense that could result in arrest and prosecution. The escalation from "you should accept the downgrade" to "you could be arrested" happened so fast that Junior almost missed it. Walsh had gone from mediator to enforcer in the span of a single breath, transforming Dr. Mitchell's assertion of her contractual rights into criminal behavior that warranted federal intervention. A second security officer, younger and black, looked uncomfortable with the direction this was taking. His eyes met Dr. Mitchell's for a moment, and Junior saw recognition pass between them. The shared understanding that came from being black in America and knowing exactly what was about to happen and being powerless to stop it without risking your own career. Officer Davis, according to his nameplate, didn't speak, but his discomfort was visible in the set of his shoulders, the way his hands stayed carefully away from his equipment belt, the micro-expressions that flashed across his face before professional neutrality locked back into place. The third officer, Murphy, showed no such hesitation. The choice was hers, but she needed to make it immediately because the flight was ready to board and couldn't be held indefinitely for one uncooperative passenger. Dr. Mitchell's hands trembled slightly, the only outward sign of the emotion she was working so hard to contain. Her voice remained steady when she spoke, directing her words to Walsh, but loud enough that the growing crowd of passengers could hear every syllable. She was a physician. She had a medical conference tomorrow morning where she was presenting research that could save children's lives. She had purchased a first-class ticket specifically so she could work during the flight and arrive rested enough to deliver that presentation. She was not uncooperative. She was not creating a disturbance. She was simply refusing to accept discrimination disguised as customer service. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Discrimination. Hayes reacted immediately, her voice rising with indignation. There was no discrimination happening here. The airline made seating adjustments all the time for various operational reasons. Dr. Mitchell was being unreasonable and making this about something it wasn't. But phones were recording now, at least a dozen passengers capturing footage that would be uploaded to social media within minutes. The young mother was filming openly, her expression suggesting she recognized exactly what was happening and wanted documentation. An elderly white woman in the boarding queue was shaking her head, whispering to her husband about how disgraceful this treatment was. Walsh made a decision. His hand moved to his radio, calling for backup with the code that indicated a situation was escalating beyond what 3 officers could handle safely. Then he turned back to Dr. Mitchell with finality written across his features. He informed her that she was being denied boarding on Flight 892 for failure to comply with crew instructions and creating a disturbance in the gate area. She needed to collect her belongings and depart the terminal voluntarily, or she would be removed by force. Doctor, Mitchell's voice cracked slightly when she asked what she was supposed to do about the conference, about the presentation she'd spent months preparing, about the research that could change pediatric cardiology, if only she could get to Chicago to present it. Walsh's answer was cold. That wasn't his problem. She should have thought about the consequences before refusing to cooperate with airline personnel. The surgeon bent to collect her bag with movements that had become mechanical, shock beginning to override the carefully maintained composure. Her hands were shaking visibly now as she gathered the tablet and papers and coffee cup that suddenly seemed like artifacts from a different reality, where she'd been a respected physician about to board a flight, rather than someone being expelled from an airport for the crime of asserting her rights. Junior couldn't stay silent anymore. He stepped forward, his 8-year-old voice cutting through the tension with unexpected authority. He addressed Hayes directly, asking her to explain the specific policy violation that warranted denying Dr. Mitchell's boarding. The gate agent's head whipped around, eyes narrowing as she focused on the small boy who'd apparently decided to insert himself into adult business. Her response was automatic dismissal. This didn't concern him. He should return to his guardian and let the adults handle the situation. But Junior didn't move. He repeated his question with the precision of someone who'd sat through enough board meetings to know that vague answers meant people were hiding something. What specific Sky Nation policy had Dr. Mitchell violated that justified denying her the seat she'd purchased? Hayes looked to Bradley for support, but the supervisor was staring at Junior with growing recognition. Something about the boy's face or voice or manner was triggering memories of photos he'd seen in company communications, the quarterly reports that featured the Davis family's continued leadership of the empire that owned Sky Nation. Bradley's face went pale as understanding dawned. Junior pressed forward, his voice rising slightly so the crowd could hear. Because from where he was standing, it looked like gate agents were denying a black passenger her confirmed first-class seat so a white passenger could have it instead. And that wasn't a policy violation on Dr. Mitchell's part. That was discrimination on Sky Nation's part. Walsh stepped between Junior and the gate counter, his voice taking on the patronizing tone adults used when they wanted children to stop asking inconvenient questions. He told Junior to step back, let the grown-ups handle this, go back to his mother or whoever was supposed to be watching him. Grace appeared at Junior's elbow, her presence commanding immediate attention. She didn't touch Walsh, didn't raise her voice, but something in her bearing made the security officer pause mid-sentence. Her words were quiet, but absolutely clear. The young man was perfectly capable of speaking for himself. And if Officer Walsh had been paying attention to who he was dismissing, he might want to reconsider his approach. Walsh's hand moved toward his radio again, clearly preparing to call for additional backup to deal with what was rapidly becoming a situation beyond his ability to control. But before he could press the transmit button, Junior pulled out his phone with deliberate slowness. The movement caught everyone's attention. Hayes, Bradley, Walsh, Murphy, Davis, all eyes focused on the 8-year-old boy who was now scrolling through his contacts with the calm efficiency of someone who made important phone calls regularly. Junior's finger hovered over a name in his directory, and his voice carried across the gate area with unexpected authority. He suggested that before security removed anyone else from the terminal, someone might want to call James Patterson and inform him that his gate agents were currently violating federal civil rights law on camera. Bradley's voice was barely a whisper. Oh, God. Hayes didn't understand yet. She demanded to know who Junior thought he was, making threats and disrupting airline operations. Did he have any idea how serious it was to interfere with airport security? But Junior was already placing the call, and when the voice on the other end answered, he put the phone on speaker so everyone at Gate 41 could hear. The voice was cultured, concerned, carrying the particular tension of someone who'd just been interrupted during a Saturday morning and knew it had to be important for the caller to use the emergency number. Patterson's voice filled the gate area. Junior, what's wrong? The gate agents froze. Security officers looked at each other with dawning comprehension. Doctor. Mitchell, still holding her bag and preparing to leave, stared at the small boy who'd somehow just connected a phone call to Sky Nation's CEO and was being addressed with familiar concern. Junior's response was calm, almost conversational, but his words landed like artillery shells. He was at JFK Terminal 4, Gate 41, watching employees drag Dr. Sarah Mitchell out of the boarding queue for refusing to give up her first-class seat to a Diamond Elite passenger who wanted it more. The same Dr. Mitchell who'd been questioned at check-in, scrutinized beyond what any white passenger faced, and was now being threatened with arrest for asserting her contractual rights. Patterson's voice went sharp with alarm. Wait, what? Who authorized this? Junior's eyes moved across the gate counter, taking in Hayes's white face and Bradley's expression of dawning horror. He answered that the employees in question were standing right here and could explain their decision-making process if Patterson wanted to speak with them directly. But first, Junior had a question for the CEO. Did Patterson remember Section 4.7 of the Davis Family Trust documents? The clause that gave Junior direct authority to terminate any employee whose actions violated the company's ethical standards. The silence from the phone lasted 3 full seconds before Patterson's voice returned, quieter now, carrying the weight of someone who understood exactly what was about to happen and knew there was no way to stop it. Patterson confirmed that he remembered that clause. It had never been invoked before. The board had assumed it was mostly symbolic, a way for Junior's parents to ensure their values would outlive them. Junior's response was simple. It wasn't symbolic anymore. He was invoking it now. Effective immediately. Hayes made a sound like she'd been punched in the stomach. Bradley grabbed the edge of the counter for support. Walsh's hand fell away from his radio as he processed the fact that the 8-year-old boy he'd been about to have removed from the terminal was apparently someone with the authority to end careers. Dr. Mitchell was staring at Junior with an expression that mixed confusion, hope, and disbelief in equal measures. Junior continued speaking to Patterson, his voice carrying across a gate area that had fallen completely silent. He was directing the CEO to ground Flight 892 immediately and return it to the gate if it had already pushed back. Junior would be boarding the aircraft personally to address the situation with passengers and crew, and Patterson should probably alert the legal department that they were going to need significant resources for the civil rights lawsuits that were about to be filed. Patterson's voice was hollow. The flight hasn't pushed back yet. I'll have it held at the gate. Junior, are you certain about this? Once you go public with your identity. But Junior had already hung up and turned his attention to Hayes, who looked like she might faint. His words were precise, each one chosen for maximum clarity. Ms. Hayes, you've spent the last 20 minutes discriminating against Dr. Mitchell based on assumptions about who belongs in first class. You created fictional irregularities, demanded unnecessary verification, and attempted to coerce her into accepting less than what she'd paid for. That's a violation of federal civil rights law and Sky Nation's customer service policies. The gate agent tried to speak, but no sound emerged. Junior shifted his focus to Bradley. And Mr. Bradley, you enabled this discrimination by automatically siding with your employee rather than examining her conduct. You threatened Dr. Mitchell with denied boarding as punishment for refusing to accept theft of her seat. That's abuse of authority and complicity in discrimination. The supervisor's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. Then Junior turned to Walsh, and his voice acquired an edge that hadn't been there before. Officer Walsh, you escalated this situation from a customer service issue to a criminal matter without investigating whether the airline's actions were legitimate. You threatened Dr. Mitchell with arrest for asserting rights she legally possesses. That's a violation of your duty to protect passengers, not intimidate them on behalf of corporate interests. Walsh's face flushed red, but he didn't respond. Junior pulled his watch closer to his mouth, speaking directly to the microphone that had been recording everything. For the record, this is Marcus Davis, Jr., age 8, CEO and majority shareholder of Sky Nation Airlines via the Davis Family Trust. The time is 9:52 a.m. on Saturday. I'm formally terminating Jennifer Hayes and Tom Bradley for ethical violations, including discrimination, abuse of authority, and violation of passenger civil rights. I'm also requesting a full investigation of Officer Walsh and his colleagues for their handling of this incident. The words echoed across the terminal, captured by dozens of phones and Junior's own recording equipment, creating documentation that no corporate lawyer would be able to suppress or spin. Hayes found her voice finally, a desperate whisper. You can't. I have a family. I've worked here for 12 years. Junior's response was quiet, but absolutely firm. You should have thought about your family before you decided that Dr. Mitchell didn't deserve the dignity you extended to every white passenger who boarded this morning. Actions have consequences, Ms. Hayes. Today you're learning what those consequences look like. The gate area erupted into chaos as passengers processed what they'd just witnessed. Phones pivoted to capture Junior's face, his small frame somehow commanding the space despite being 3 feet shorter than every adult around him. Social media notifications began pinging across the terminal as the first videos hit Twitter and TikTok, hashtagged with variations of Justice at Gate 41 and Billionaire Kid CEO. Bradley made one desperate attempt to salvage his career, stepping toward Junior with his hands raised in a placating gesture meant to suggest this was all a misunderstanding that could be resolved quietly. His voice carried the false warmth of someone trying to charm his way out of consequences he absolutely deserved. Perhaps they could discuss this in private, away from passengers and cameras. Find a reasonable solution that addressed everyone's concerns without unnecessary drama. Junior's response cut through the corporate double talk like a scalpel through tissue. The time for private discussions ended when Dr. Mitchell was publicly humiliated at this gate counter. Everything that happened from this moment forward would be equally public, equally documented, and equally permanent. Grace's phone was already ringing, the screen showing incoming calls from Sky Nation's legal department, the board secretary, and 3 different vice presidents who'd apparently just been alerted that the 8-year-old owner had invoked emergency CEO authority at an airport gate. She silenced each call without answering, her attention focused entirely on Junior and the security officers who were still trying to process whether they should be taking orders from a child. Walsh's radio crackled with incoming traffic, a supervisor's voice demanding to know the status of the situation at Gate 41 and whether backup was still required. The security officer's hand moved toward the transmit button, hesitated, then fell back to his side as he realized he had no idea how to summarize what was happening in language that wouldn't make him sound delusional. How did you explain that an 8-year-old had just fired 2 airline employees via speakerphone with the CEO while threatening to investigate airport security for civil rights violations? How did you document that you'd been seconds away from forcibly removing a passenger before discovering that the small boy defending her was actually the owner of the airline? Murphy, the 3rd security officer, took a step backward like he wanted to physically distance himself from whatever clusterfuck was unfolding. His eyes kept moving between Junior and the gate agents and the growing crowd of passengers who were filming everything with expressions ranging from shock to savage satisfaction. Officer Davis, the black security officer who'd looked uncomfortable from the beginning, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, meant for Walsh's ears, but loud enough that Junior's watch microphone picked up every word. They needed to back off immediately and let this play out without security involvement, because whatever was happening here was way above their pay grade, and getting deeper into it would only destroy their own careers along with everyone else's. Walsh's jaw worked silently for a moment before he nodded once, sharp and final. He stepped back from the gate counter, gesturing for Murphy and Davis to do the same, creating physical space between security personnel and the confrontation that was still unfolding. Dr. Mitchell hadn't moved from where she stood holding her bag, her expression cycling through disbelief and hope and caution. She was looking at Junior like he might be a hallucination, a stress-induced fantasy conjured by a mind that couldn't accept the reality of being expelled from an airport for refusing to accept discrimination. Junior turned to face her fully, and his voice gentled in ways it hadn't when addressing the airline employees. He apologized for not intervening sooner, explained that he'd needed to document the full extent of the discrimination before taking action, and assured her that she would absolutely be flying to Chicago today in seat 3A as originally planned. The surgeon's voice was barely a whisper when she asked who Junior was, really, beyond the name he'd given Patterson on the phone. Grace stepped forward to make formal introductions, her tone carrying the weight of someone who'd spent decades navigating corporate hierarchies and understood when ceremony mattered. She identified herself as Grace Williams, trustee of the Davis Family Trust and legal guardian to Marcus Davis, Jr., age 8, who'd inherited controlling interest in Sky Nation Airlines, along with 16 other companies following the death of his parents 3 years ago. Doctor? Mitchell's knees seemed to give out slightly. She caught herself against the gate counter, one hand braced against the surface where Hayes had examined her documents with such theatrical skepticism 20 minutes earlier. The surgeon's next words came wrapped in wonder and confusion. An 8-year-old owned the airline? And he'd been watching this whole situation unfold? Why hadn't he stopped it before it escalated to the point where security was called? Junior's answer revealed the strategic thinking that had guided his actions all morning. Because stopping it early would have proved only that one employee was having a bad day. Documenting the full pattern, check-in agent, gate agent, supervisor, security officers, proved systematic discrimination that required systematic solutions. Individual correction wouldn't fix what was broken in SkyNation's culture. Only comprehensive reform would prevent this from happening to the next passenger who didn't look like what gate agents expected first-class customers to resemble. Hayes was crying now, mascara running down her face in dark streaks as the reality of unemployment sank in. She tried one more time to plead her case, insisting she'd been following procedures, doing her job the way she'd been trained, making decisions that supervisors had always supported in the past. Junior's response was merciless. If following procedures meant discriminating against passengers based on race, then the procedures were wrong, and the supervisors who supported them were equally culpable. Hayes wasn't being fired for a single mistake. She was being fired for a pattern of behavior that had generated 12 complaints in 14 months, every one involving passengers of color. Every one dismissed by the same supervisor who was standing beside her right now. The gate agent's voice rose toward hysteria. How did Junior know about her complaint history? That information was supposed to be confidential, protected by employment privacy laws, but Junior had access to everything through his position as majority shareholder. Every complaint filed, every investigation conducted, every disciplinary action taken or not taken. It all lived in databases that he could query whenever he wanted to understand how his companies were really operating versus how executives claimed they were operating. 3 black SUVs appeared outside the terminal windows, pulling up to the gate area with the precision of vehicles whose drivers knew exactly where they needed to be. Junior recognized the lead vehicle as Patterson's personal car, the one the CEO used for emergency situations that required his immediate physical presence. The executive emerged looking like he'd dressed in under 2 minutes, his tie crooked and jacket misaligned in ways that suggested he'd grabbed whatever was closest while running out of his Upper East Side apartment. 2 attorneys flanked him, both carrying briefcases that probably contained liability waivers and settlement agreements and every legal document SkyNation might need to contain the damage from whatever had happened at Gate 41. Patterson's eyes swept across the scene, taking in the crying gate agent and the shell-shocked supervisor and the security officers standing at careful distance and the crowd of passengers filming everything. Then his gaze found Junior, and something complicated passed across his face. Respect mixed with apprehension, mixed with the dawning realization that the symbolic oversight role they'd all assumed Junior would play had just become very real and very expensive. The CEO's first words were directed at Dr. Mitchell, formal apology delivered with the careful diction of someone who knew every syllable might end up in legal depositions. He expressed SkyNation's profound regret for the treatment she'd received, acknowledged that the airline's employees had failed to meet basic standards of customer service and human dignity, and assured her that immediate steps were being taken to ensure this never happened to another passenger. Dr. Mitchell accepted the apology with grace, but didn't let Patterson off easily. She wanted to know what immediate steps meant in concrete terms, because she'd heard plenty of corporate apologies before and watched companies promise reform while changing nothing substantive about their practices. Patterson glanced at Junior, silently asking permission to speak for the company, and received a small nod in return. The CEO outlined initial actions. Hayes and Bradley were terminated effective immediately, as Junior had directed. Security footage from the past 6 months would be reviewed by an independent civil rights organization to identify other incidents requiring investigation. All gate agents and supervisors at JFK would undergo mandatory bias training within 30 days, with failure resulting in immediate termination. And Dr. Mitchell would receive lifetime first-class status on SkyNation, full refund of today's ticket, and compensation for the emotional distress she'd experienced. Junior interrupted before Patterson could finish, and $15 million. The CEO's expression froze mid-sentence. One of the attorneys made a choking sound. Junior clarified. Dr. Mitchell's research could save children's lives, but medical research required funding that hospitals and universities struggled to provide. Sky Nation would be donating $15 million to Columbia University Medical Center to support her cardiac surgery program, with Dr. Mitchell having full discretion over how those funds were allocated. Patterson's voice was strained when he asked if Junior understood how much $15 million was, whether he'd really thought through the budgetary implications of making that commitment without board approval. But Junior's response made clear he'd thought through every detail. Sky Nation had allocated $12 million for customer acquisition marketing in the next fiscal quarter. The publicity from this incident would generate more brand awareness than any advertising campaign, especially if the story focused on an 8-year-old CEO who fired discriminatory employees and donated millions to medical research. The company would save money while actually doing something meaningful with resources that would otherwise go to Facebook ads and influencer partnerships. One of the attorneys was frantically typing notes, probably calculating whether Junior's logic would hold up under shareholder scrutiny. The other attorney had pulled out her phone and was already searching for precedents involving minor CEOs making major financial commitments on behalf of publicly traded companies. Dr. Mitchell was staring at Junior with tears streaming down her face now. But these were different tears than the ones Hayes was crying. The surgeon's voice shook when she tried to thank him, to express what it meant that someone had seen her being humiliated and hadn't looked away, hadn't decided it was easier to pretend discrimination wasn't happening. Junior's response was simple. His parents had taught him that money sitting in bank accounts didn't save lives or change systems or protect people from injustice. Money only mattered when it was used for something beyond enriching the people who already had too much of it. The words hung in the terminal air like a challenge to everyone listening. Passengers, employees, executives, asking what they did with whatever power or privilege they possessed, whether they used it to maintain comfortable hierarchies or disrupt unjust ones. Grace's phone lit up with an incoming call that she actually answered this time, her expression shifting as she listened to whoever was on the other end. When she hung up, she informed Junior that the story had hit national news. CNN was running it as breaking coverage, showing the videos that passengers had uploaded, along with photos of Junior from various business publications. The network had already identified Dr. Mitchell through her Columbia affiliation and was requesting interviews with everyone involved. Junior made an executive decision. Dr. Mitchell needed to get to Chicago for her presentation, which meant boarding her on the next available flight immediately. Sky Nation could handle media inquiries without forcing the surgeon to relive her trauma for cameras while missing the conference that had brought her to the airport in the first place. Patterson nodded, already pulling out his phone to arrange alternative travel. He could have Dr. Mitchell on a private jet within 90 minutes if she was willing to fly from Teterboro instead of JFK. The company would cover all costs, provide ground transportation to New Jersey, and ensure she arrived in Chicago with time to prepare for tomorrow's presentation. But Dr. Mitchell surprised everyone by declining the private jet. She wanted to fly commercial, wanted to board Flight 892 in Seat 3A, exactly as she'd planned. Wanted to demonstrate that she wasn't going to let discrimination chase her out of spaces she had every right to occupy. Her voice was firm when she explained. If she accepted alternative arrangements now, it would feel like letting them win. The gate agents who'd questioned her legitimacy, the supervisor who'd threatened her with denied boarding, the security officers who'd prepared to remove her by force, they would all get to tell themselves that she'd been the problem, that her departure proved she didn't really belong in first class after all. But if she boarded this flight, sat in her assigned seat, and flew to Chicago exactly as planned, then the message would be clear. She belonged there. She'd always belonged there. And the only people who needed to leave were the ones who tried to take that belonging away from her. Junior understood immediately. He turned to Patterson with instructions. Flight 892 would board normally, with Dr. Mitchell in seat 3A and Junior himself in seat 12C, as his ticket indicated. Hayes and Bradley would be escorted from the terminal before boarding began. And Patterson should probably prepare a statement for the passengers, explaining why their flight had been delayed and what actions Sky Nation was taking to address the discrimination they'd all witnessed. The CEO looked like he wanted to argue, to suggest that having Junior on the flight was unnecessary risk. But Grace's expression stopped him. She knew better than anyone that when Junior made decisions about how to use his authority, negotiation was pointless. His parents had raised him to lead from the front, to never ask employees or customers to do things he wasn't willing to do himself. Airport security had multiplied while they were talking, half a dozen additional officers forming a perimeter around Gate 41 to manage the crowd of onlookers that had swelled to over 100 people. Some were passengers booked on Flight 892, but most were travelers from other gates who'd heard about the confrontation and come to witness whatever was happening. Walsh was coordinating with the additional officers, his earlier confidence replaced by careful professionalism. He approached Patterson rather than Junior, asking how airport security could assist with ensuring the situation proceeded smoothly from this point forward. Patterson deferred to Junior, who'd apparently become the de facto authority on how to handle the gate area, despite being 8 years old and roughly the same height as the carry-on bags surrounding them. Junior's instructions were precise. Hayes and Bradley needed to collect their belongings and depart the terminal through non-public corridors to avoid media attention. Officer Davis should remain at the gate to ensure boarding proceeded without incident. Walsh and Murphy could return to their regular duties, and someone needed to locate Richard Whitmore and inform him that his request for seat 3A had been denied. His complaint about that denial would not be entertained, and any future attempts to leverage his Diamond Elite status to displace other passengers would result in permanent revocation of his loyalty benefits. Walsh accepted the instructions without question, which spoke volumes about how completely the power dynamics had shifted in the past 20 minutes. Security officers who'd been preparing to remove Dr. Mitchell by force were now taking orders from the child who defended her. Hayes was still crying when 2 Sky Nation supervisors arrived to escort her from the terminal. The supervisor's entire career had evaporated in the time it took Junior to make a single phone call, and his brain hadn't fully processed the transition from employed manager to terminated ex-employee facing potential civil rights lawsuits. Grace appeared at Junior's side once the terminated employees had been removed, her voice low enough that only he could hear. She asked if he was prepared for what came next, the media scrutiny and legal battles and board meetings where executives would question whether an 8-year-old should have the authority to make decisions that cost the company millions of dollars. Junior's answer revealed thinking beyond his years. Let them question. His parents had structured the trust specifically to prevent boards from overruling him on ethical matters. They'd understood that corporate executives optimized for profit, while rationalizing away the human costs of their optimization. Someone needed to speak for the people those executives considered acceptable losses, and his parents had decided that someone should be their son. The words carried weight that made Grace's eyes shine with tears she refused to let fall. She'd watched Junior grow from a 5-year-old who'd just lost his parents to an 8-year-old who understood power in ways most adults never learned. His father's analytical brilliance, combined with his mother's moral clarity, had created someone genuinely dangerous to systems that relied on people looking away from injustice. Patterson returned from making phone calls, his expression suggesting the news wasn't good. The Sky Nation board had been alerted to the situation and was demanding an emergency session to review Junior's actions and determine whether the company needed to invoke protective measures outlined in the trust documents. Junior asked what protective measures Patterson was referring to. The CEO's explanation was careful, clearly trying to avoid implying criticism of Junior's decisions, while outlining the legal reality. The trust documents included provisions for the board to petition family court if they believed Junior's choices posed existential risk to the company. It was meant as a safeguard against scenarios where a child CEO made catastrophically bad decisions that destroyed shareholder value. But Junior had studied those provisions extensively with his attorneys. He knew the threshold for invoking them was extraordinarily high. The board needed to prove not just that his decisions were expensive, but that they were fundamentally irrational and damaging beyond any reasonable business justification. His question to Patterson was direct. Did the CEO believe that firing employees who'd violated federal civil rights law constituted irrational decision-making? Patterson's answer was immediate. Absolutely not. Determinations were legally sound and ethically necessary. Then, did Patterson believe that compensating a victim of discrimination and funding medical research that would save children's lives constituted existential risk to the company? Again, the CEO's response supported Junior's actions. The financial impact was manageable, the publicity was overwhelmingly positive, and the long-term cultural benefits of demonstrating real accountability would strengthen Sky Nation's brand significantly. Junior's conclusion was simple. Then the board could demand all the emergency sessions they wanted. His decisions would survive any legal scrutiny, and attempting to override him would only generate additional negative publicity about a company trying to protect discriminatory employees from consequences. One of Patterson's attorneys cleared his throat, drawing attention with obvious reluctance. He felt obligated to point out that while Junior's logic was sound, 8-year-olds generally didn't testify in family court proceedings without facing significant skepticism from judges about their competence to make complex business decisions. But Grace's response shut down that concern immediately. Junior had been making complex business decisions for 3 years, had sat through hundreds of board meetings, had demonstrated business acumen that most MBA graduates never developed. Any family court judge who spent 30 minutes questioning him would recognize his competence, and attempting to remove his authority would backfire spectacularly when media coverage showed a board of white executives trying to silence a black child CEO who'd fired employees for racism. The attorneys exchanged glances that suggested they were rethinking their strategy for managing Junior's authority. Patterson's phone buzzed with incoming text messages, the screen lighting up with notifications faster than he could read them. He scrolled through with increasing concern before looking up at Junior with something approaching fear. The videos had gone viral beyond anything the airline's PR team could contain. Hashtag Justice at Gate 41 was trending globally, with over 2 million mentions in the past hour. News outlets across 6 continents were picking up the story, most of them leading with headlines about an 8-year-old black CEO firing racist employees. Sky Nation's stock price had dropped 8% in after-hours trading as investors tried to calculate the financial impact of the scandal. But buried in Patterson's message queue was data that complicated the narrative. Customer service inquiries to Sky Nation had increased 400%, with the vast majority expressing support for Junior's actions and pledging to fly the airline specifically because of how leadership had responded to discrimination. Brand favorability scores had jumped 23 points among demographic groups that historically avoided the airline due to perceived bias. The short-term stock decline might reverse quickly if public sentiment translated into sustained customer loyalty. Junior processed that information with the analytical efficiency his father had modeled during their too brief time together. Market panic about leadership stability was predictable and temporary. Cultural transformation that attracted customers who'd previously chosen competitors was valuable and potentially permanent. The board could either recognize that distinction or learn it the hard way when shareholders realized Junior's decisions were actually generating long-term value. Gate 41's PA system crackled to life with a new voice, a replacement gate agent who'd been pulled from another assignment to handle Flight 892's boarding. Her announcement was carefully neutral, informing passengers that boarding would commence in 5 minutes and thanking them for their patience during the delay. Dr. Mitchell straightened her blazer and collected her bag, preparing to finally board the flight she'd been trying to catch for the past hour. Her eyes met Junior's, and silent communication passed between them. Gratitude and determination and shared understanding that what had happened here mattered beyond one flight and one passenger. Junior asked if she was truly ready to board, to sit in that first-class cabin surrounded by passengers who'd watched her humiliation, some of whom had probably agreed with the gate agent's decision to question her legitimacy. The surgeon's answer came without hesitation. She'd spent 20 years being the only black woman in rooms that didn't want her there. One more flight wouldn't break her. And besides, now those passengers would know exactly who she was and what she'd overcome to earn her seat. Grace handed Dr. Mitchell a business card with Junior's private contact information, instructing her to call immediately if she experienced any problems during the flight or at the conference, or anywhere else that Sky Nation's employees interacted with her. The airline would be monitoring this flight specifically, but backup was only a phone call away if monitoring failed. Patterson added his own contact information, with apologies that felt genuine. He'd been CEO for 6 years and had apparently remained ignorant of systematic discrimination happening under his leadership. That ignorance ended today. Every complaint would be investigated personally. Every employee would be retrained, and anyone who couldn't treat passengers with dignity, regardless of race, would be invited to find employment elsewhere. The replacement gate agent, a black woman in her 40s whose name tag identified her as Tyrell Washington, made a second announcement. First-class passengers could now board Flight 892. Dr. Mitchell moved toward the podium with her head high and her shoulders back, and this time when she presented her boarding pass, Tyrell scanned it immediately with a warm smile and a quiet acknowledgement of what the surgeon had endured. The words were simple, but carried weight. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Mitchell. It's an honor to have you flying with us today." Junior watched the surgeon disappear down the jetway before turning to Patterson with final instructions. Grace would accompany him on the flight to Chicago. Sky Nation's legal team should prepare comprehensive documentation of every discrimination complaint filed in the past 5 years, organized by employee, location, and demographic pattern. The board meeting could happen Monday morning, giving everyone time to review data and prepare for discussions that would determine whether the company was serious about reform or just performing damage control. Patterson agreed to everything without argument, his earlier resistance replaced by recognition that Junior's authority was absolute, regardless of age or board preferences. Grace and Junior moved toward the boarding queue as economy passengers were called, joining the line with carry-on bags that looked unremarkable despite containing tablets worth thousands of dollars and documentation that would reshape an industry. The replacement gate agent's eyes widened slightly when Junior reached the podium and presented his boarding pass, clearly recognizing him from the confrontation that had just concluded. But Tyrell's professionalism never wavered as she scanned his ticket and welcomed him aboard with the same courtesy she'd extended to every passenger. Junior paused before entering the jetway, looking back at the gate area where hundreds of passengers were still filming and photographing and posting updates about the 8-year-old CEO who'd defended a stranger from discrimination. His watch continued recording, capturing footage that would eventually become part of congressional testimony and civil rights training and business school case studies about moral leadership. Grace's hand rested gently on his shoulder, silent reminder that she was with him, whatever came next. They walked down the jetway together, an 8-year-old boy and his guardian, carrying the weight of an empire built on principles that were about to be tested in ways his parents had never imagined. The aircraft cabin was quiet when they boarded, passengers watching Junior with expressions ranging from curiosity to respect to uncertainty about what his presence meant for the flight. He moved through first class without looking at the Whitmores in row 1, past Dr. Mitchell in seat 3A, where she was reviewing presentation materials with determined focus, and found his economy seat 12 rows back. The passenger in 12A, a white businessman in his 50s, did a double take when Junior settled into the middle seat beside him. Recognition flashed across his face. Clearly he'd seen the videos or heard about the confrontation, but he didn't speak, apparently uncertain whether acknowledging an 8-year-old CEO was appropriate. Grace took seat 12B on Junior's other side, her presence a buffer between her charge and the scrutiny that would only intensify once they landed in Chicago. The captain's voice came over the PA system, different from the voice Junior had heard during his research. Harrison had apparently been removed from the flight, along with the gate agents, replaced by a pilot whose record showed no discrimination complaints. The new captain apologized for the delay and thanked passengers for their patience during what he carefully termed an operational issue that had required management attention. No mention of discrimination or firings or 8-year-old CEOs invoking emergency authority. Just operational issues, bland and forgettable. The kind of corporate language that transformed injustice into inconvenience. Junior pulled out his tablet and opened the file containing 52 discrimination complaints from the past 18 months. The surgeon's story had been documented and addressed. Now came the harder work, examining every other complaint, identifying every other employee who decided that some passengers deserved dignity while others deserved scrutiny, ensuring that Sky Nation's cultural transformation went deeper than firing 2 people who'd been caught on camera. His father's voice echoed one final time. Fixing one problem is easy. Fixing the system that created the problem is where real leadership begins. The aircraft pushed back from the gate, engines spinning up for the flight to Chicago. Somewhere in first class, Dr. Mitchell was preparing to present research that would save children's lives. Somewhere in Manhattan, terminated employees were beginning to understand that their actions had consequences. And somewhere in boardrooms and newsrooms and living rooms across America, people were watching an 8-year-old boy demonstrate what accountability looked like when power actually served justice instead of protecting itself.